Welcome to the Symbolic Lodge of Conversation, where consciousness and curiosity interweave into discussion. This is All Square Podcast. I'm your host, RL Franks, and today we have a very special guest. He's been a friend of mine throughout this journey. He's a third generational Mason. Please give it up for the one, the only, Jerel Fish. Jerel, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Rob.
Cheers, man. This is our 5th episode, and I'm so honored for you to be a part of this.
Well, I'm honored to be a guest on this podcast.
Great, my friend. And also, big shout out to Jesse Spielman. Thank you for the Buffalo Trace for the show. We really do appreciate it.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right, my friend. Everybody needs to know, who is Jerel Fish?
Who is Jerel Fish?
Yep.
Well, I'm brother, husband, father, Freemason. I sound like one of those Monday Mason.
It does sound like it. So what do you do in your life?
Well, aside from the aforementioned, I have a small business in Waterville, Ohio. I sell insurance, all the good people of the world.
What do you like to do for fun when you're not working?
Well, I hang out with my family, spend a lot of time with my son. We mostly enjoy riding bikes together. We do a lot of that.
Excellent. Excellent. So you're a third generational Mason. You've been in this for quite a while, even though he looks like he's 25. He's actually a little older than that. But your family has been a part of this for 3 generations. I had that correct, right?
That's right. I'm part of Generation 3 in the Fish family.
So what was it like growing up into a family that has Masonry in their blood?
Well, obviously I spent an awful lot of time around a Masonic lodge. We attended all the social functions and Christmas parties and things like that. As a little kid, I don't know how much I really understood what it all was, but it was just always a part of life. And there's my youngest brother, who Justin, we've had several conversations about that. The fact that we were raised by a Mason, surrounded by Masons our entire childhood, because the other guys in the lodge were largely like, uncles, almost members of the family. We spent so much time around them.
Which lodge was that?
It was Wakeman Lodge in Waterville, Ohio,
okay.
Which, has since merged with Rubicon.
That's right. We are official. Just for some context, we are Lodge brothers. And Jerel's had a really big impact in the fraternity. He's what we call a LEO, or a Lodge Education Officer. And as I talked to you in previous episodes, the state of Masonry of Ohio is broken up into distant districts. And he's actually a district officer, which is a DEO, a district education officer. So growing up, did your father or your grandfather openly talk about Masonry, or was that kind of like the taboo thing to do? Because I know a lot of Masons who experience that.
Well, there wasn't a lot of direct talking about maybe the workings of Masonry and that. I think it was more getting back to, like I said, in hindsight, I recognize a lot of Masonry in some of the things that my dad would say to me, maybe the way that he would address life lesson kind of things, that he didn't come out and say, Masonry taught me this, but, now as a Mason, having taken that all in myself, it's obvious.
Right. So you're a young man, you're going to school like everybody else, you're working at your family's insurance business, you down the line take it over. When did the journey officially begin for you in Masonry?
So I joined in 2002.
Okay.
And so that year was a historic year in Ohio Freemasonry. So we have our annual Grand Lodge communication. It's like the big meeting of the Grand Lodge once a year.
What happens during these events?
Well, what happens? The new leadership is elected. Any proposed changes to our bylaws, our constitutions, come up for a vote
on a state level,
on a statewide level.
Okay.
Yeah, Masonry, for those who don't know, is governed on a state level. There is no national Masonry, so Ohio makes Ohio's rules and does Ohio's things. So anyway, 2001, Grand Lodge of Ohio, they passed a piece of legislation that was pretty groundbreaking for us. For the first time, they were going to allow someone to become a Freemason, receive all 3 degrees of Masonry in a single day. This is something that had apparently been done in other states before, but was a brand new idea for Ohio. So, rolling around to spring of 2002, my dad, said, "Hey, if you've been thinking about joining at all, which I assume you probably have, this would be a great time. You can be a part of this new historic thing, thousands of people all over." And it was somewhere over 2,000 people.
Wow.
Joined in that very first, what they call a Grand Master's one-day class in 2002, April 27th, 2002. So, I submitted my petition. I was visited by the investigating committee, which consisted of, as I mentioned before, a bunch of guys that were like my uncles because I'd known them my entire life. And on April 27th, I went to the old Maycomber High School. We all packed into the auditorium there and had the experience of Ohio's very first Grandmaster's one-day class.
How long did that take in that day? I mean, there's 3 degrees in Masonry. We've talked about that on the Blue Lodge level.
Yeah.
The Entered Apprentice, the Fellow Craft, and the Master Mason. And normally that is, 3 months at a time, depending on how you get through that catechism we've talked about in the fraternity. You're experiencing this in one day, no catechism.
Right.
Tell me, how did that time go?
It makes it a very different experience. Like I said, I'm in an auditorium with hundreds of people. If I recall, they had to add a second location in Toledo because they filled that auditorium with candidates. And so I'm in a big room full of people. Essentially, how far can we go with this? What is generally a very intimate one-on-one type of experience is now being portrayed on the stage in front of a couple hundred of us in the audience. And so, as you're saying, Rob, what normally would be a process of 1 degree at a time with a period of study and meeting with a mentor in between, pretty much takes place between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m.
Yeah. You see, for our audience listening at home, I went through the traditional way. In the first episode, I talked about how I went through on Saturdays, and I had to work with my master craftsmen throughout a period of time, give back an examination, go through the fellow craft, another intimate degree, take that examination, so on and so forth, till I got to the 3rd degree and gave my final examination back. And I was 9 months before I officially became a Master Mason, and you're getting it in one day. How was the reception of something like that?
Well, I mean, we may as well get into the fact. This is a controversial point in Masonry in general. There's those that think the one-day classes are a wonderful thing because it makes it easier to bring in more members. I've heard it touted as a great way for guys that are busy to get it taken care of. Me personally, having spent the time I have in Masonry and been a part of conferring the degrees from the other side of the equation, I missed out on something that I can't ever get back. And, certainly there's so much evidence. Our junior past Grand Master of Ohio is the first Grand Master to come out of a one-day class. And so a lot of people will say, certainly you can be a one-day class Mason and achieve great things in the fraternity and get just as much out of it as anyone else. But what you'll never get out of it is that initial initiatic experience that, to my thinking, is kind of what the whole thing's built around.
Now, we're still brothers. No matter if somebody comes through a one-day class or traditionalist, we're all on the level, and we are all squared in our degrees. He's Jerel being a master Mason who's had his influence on education, and mine, who I just got out of leadership in my own home lodge. Jerel, you were a past master relatively early in your lodge after you became a master Mason, right? Your process was a little bit quicker. And for our audience at home, I want to let you know there is what? Is it 7 years of an officer line or 8?
Generally, yes. If the traditional way.
Yep, you start off as
a steward, probably a junior steward, and you move your way up through the steward chairs to become a junior deacon, senior deacon, junior, senior warden, and then master. It's a fairly long process through which you get used to the workings of the lodge. You hopefully build some leadership skills along the way so that by the time you make it there, you're well ready to lead a lodge of Masons. Yeah, my path was a little different than that. Wakeman Lodge at the time was, as many lodges are still today, not exactly full of members waiting for the positions. And so I actually managed to come in. I sat as junior deacon and then junior warden the following year. And the year after that, I was master of the lodge. So it was
What year was that? 2012 is when you joined. What was the year when you were master?
2002 was when I joined. In 2005, I was master.
3 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
3 years. I probably wasn't the greatest master in the history of Masonry. Certainly no R.L. Franks.
Stop. I'm not paying him to say that. That's his own thoughts.
But it was a good year, and that Wakeman was a fantastic lodge. I enjoyed being a part of it because it was such a tight-knit family.
You grew up with them.
As I think has been discussed a little bit in some of your other episodes, every Masonic lodge kind of has a bit of its own culture. It's made up of human beings. We're all different, and you get a little something different out of every group of guys. Wakeman was one thing, and it was fantastic. Rubicon was something entirely different and also fantastic.
So 2002, join. 2005, master.
Mm-hmm.
Been active through that whole time?
No, again, so this goes back to the merger of Wakeman and Rubicon lodges.
What year?
That would have been 2008.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe 2008, maybe 9 when it was finalized. But so that happened. And a merger, for those who don't know, basically Wakeman Lodge merged into Rubicon and became one. There is no longer a Wakeman. Any members of Wakeman become members of Rubicon. And, like I said, again, different cultures, different people. The combining of the two maybe was a little awkward at times. Neither side had been through it before. So it was around that time that I kind of fell away from Masonry for a while. And again, nothing about Rubicon Lodge that caused that. It just, for me, like I said, threw myself into it. It was a whirlwind. I did a lot in a short period of time. I was starting up my family, and I just kind of stepped back for a while. And that turned into almost 8 years.
An 8-year hiatus?
Just about, yeah.
So throughout that, are you still listening to podcasts or staying in touch with people? I mean, you're a young man. I mean, how old were you in 2002?
2002, I was 22.
22. Yeah. 2005, you're 25, right?
Yep.
Sorry, I'm trying to do math on the fly here.
Yeah.
And then 2008, you take kind of a break. You got to start your family. Masonry should never impede with your family, your country, your work, your religious beliefs. I mean, you have to take care of you first. This is just a fraternity that gives you those working tools to better yourself. And we're going to get into that. So 2008, you take a little break. And then what brought you kind of back into the fraternity?
Well, it was a combination of things. So, first there was you.
This isn't the All Rob podcast.
No,
this is the All Square podcast.
But quite frankly, this guy, Rob Franks. He got in there. He's a mover and shaker coming up through the line at Rubicon Lodge. He's sees the potential early on in this fraternity for what building brotherhood can really mean. He starts organizing social events, one of which was a nice little cigar affair up at the La Casa
De La Habana.
Yeah, De La Habana up there in Toledo. And, you know, Rob's a guy that makes things happen. He gets on the phone and calls people up. He doesn't know who Jerel Fish is, but I'm on the list. He says, here's a member of the lodge we haven't seen in a while. So he calls me and says, come out to this cigar event. I like cigars, so I did. So I, got out there. I got to meet Robbie. I got to meet some of the other guys. We had a fun night. Leave it at that. That in itself didn't bring me back into the lodge room, but over time, we were started bumping into each other at the soccer games.
Yes, we're big avid soccer fans. That's true.
It was so Robbie was just kind of this constant in the back of my head, going, Masonry, come on back. And then I would also cite the good friend of both of ours, Mark Harris.
Absolutely.
It was the year he was going into the East as master. And again, Mark and I have just had a personal relationship even outside of Masonry at that point. So I knew I wanted to go out, see him installed as master. And around that same time, an old family friend passed away. And I attended his Masonic funeral. And I would say, if anything, that was the kicker for me, was attending that funeral, seeing all of the brothers who turned out to perform that Masonic service, which that's something maybe hasn't been talked about. That's something we do. One of the few things that we do completely in public as Masons. When a brother passes away, if the family requests it, usually on behalf of the brother, we perform a Masonic funeral service. And like I said, attending that really stirred up in me and reminded me the real power of that brotherhood and what Masonry can mean in your life. And I think that was really the final tipping point that got me to throw myself back into it.
It's amazing this bond that we have of guys from all around and all these characters. We talked about this on the last episode. John Majorowski talked about how impactful Masonic funeral was for him as well, and to say goodbye to those characters that you meet and you just take for granted at times, and you're all see them next week, and then they're not there, and you feel empty, but everybody's around you, and we're all supporting each other, and we have to go say goodbye and do what's right for that family and show this beautiful ceremony. If you ever get the chance to see a Masonic funeral, it is truly touching for all the brethren to take the time to say goodbye to that man.
It is. It's always been meaningful to me. I mean, we just had to do one last week, and it's something, of course, I hate when we've lost a brother, and that's something that needs to be done, but I love that that's something that we do as a fraternity, because it really is. It's a beautiful and moving thing, and it makes me proud to be a Mason when we can do that.
So mote it be, my brother. So mote it be. Let's jump back. We're having these social events. I want to just tell the audience, as you heard in the earlier episodes of All Square, I was a weekend Mason. I couldn't be active in the lodge due to my work commitment. I was thinking about, how am I going to get to know these guys? So I asked the lodge's permission to start hosting social events. And that day, when I first met you at La Casa de la Habana on Monroe Street in Toledo, Ohio, check it out, great smoking place.
Good spot.
I called, and I also put postings on social media to bring brethren from all around. It wasn't just a Rubicon social, even though that's what it was called. It was brethren from all walks of life, and you're meeting pipe fitters and lawyers and students in the University of Toledo, and it's just men that you would never see anywhere else in the fraternity was dwelling right here in this little upstairs cigar house, having drinks and getting to know each other. And talk about that connectiveness of what it means to be a Mason.
Well, yeah, that is, I think that's one of the biggest things about it, and I'm sure this has been discussed before, but it's a huge thing. I mean, you come into this fraternity, and it affords you the opportunity to forge friendships with people who, as we say, otherwise would have remained at a perpetual distance from. You never would have probably even been in the same room as this guy, and he may end up being one of your best friends. It's in the lodge, all social status, all, standing as far as that goes is stripped away, and we are brothers. And in the best of circumstances, which fortunately is what we get to experience, certainly in our lodge and a lot of others in the district, I'm seeing this is that really happens, and the guys really mean it, and that spills out of the lodge room. And yeah, it just is an opportunity to forge relationships, to learn from, and probably teach too. You never know. That's always the thing. Sometimes you don't even realize what you're doing for someone else.
Talk about age in the Masonry, because we're all from different ages. You can have somebody sitting next to you that's 79 to somebody sitting next to you that's 22 that's joined. We really don't see age in our fraternity.
No, not at all. Like I mentioned, really somebody who through Masonry I consider one of my closest friends is older than my parents.
You're talking about Mark Harris.
And there's nothing unusual about that because we're just brothers, And for sure, the other thing about that I know you probably experienced too, because you also joined when you were fairly young, but at 22 years old, it was huge to me to spend so much time with and have conversations with and learn from guys in their 70s and 80s who had just a completely different perspective on life. And I feel like that gave me a huge jumpstart into adulthood and maturity. When most other 22-year-olds are just running around with other 22-year-olds, I had this whole peer group of guys, not just 70s and 80s, but anywhere from my age up through that. And yeah, I think that had a big impact on how I developed as a young man.
You're a Mason who has really spearheaded education, not just in our lodge, but in the district. You and I have worked together to start lecture series. Why are you such a proponent for education in Masonry?
Well, because why be a Mason if you're not going to delve into this vast wealth of resources that have been accumulated over the years? I mean, that's a big part of what makes us not just another social club. We're not the Elks or the Moose or whatever, there is wisdom that has been accumulated and recorded. And, I think it's a huge thing to me to see that be a big part of our meetings is, transmitting some of that, giving the members something to take home with them to think about. Yeah, like you said, that lecture series we did last year was one of the most exciting things I've been a part of education-wise. And, it was fantastic the way we were able to bring brethren from all over the district in and deliver them these fantastic, that's true, from all over the state, and deliver this really high quality education. Because, I like to do what I can do, but it's even more fun when we can bring in someone who's really like an accomplished author or researcher and let them do their thing. And yeah, it just, to me, Masonry wouldn't make any sense without education.
So we're talking about, people writing, authors. We were bringing people in for the lecture series. People from other lodges were coming in. People from other districts and states were coming in to see this full houses on a different range of topics. Cathedrals built by Masons, UFOs on the level with John Majorowski, haunted Masonic lodges, but even just the standard Blue Lodge of how to be a better man and how to really spearhead your lodge, with rebirth and growth. Education's important to you. Has there been any authors or any topics in Masonry that really has, influenced your life that you like to learn about? and talk about?
Well, I mean, so much. The beauty to me of Masonry is that, and the Masons will understand. This is a little difficult to convey maybe to the non-Masons out there, but everything in Masonry just opens up another door to another rabbit hole you can chase down to more information, more knowledge. You find a new book you read that gives you ideas you never thought of before, and you want to share it with somebody else. Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to start. I mean,
Well, how about if you start with somebody like a Carl Claudy?
right? I need to go there. I'm a big fan. Carl Claudy was a fairly prolific Masonic author in the 1920s, and I think everything that he wrote stands up because, like I said, some of the esoteric philosophical avenues in Masonry can get pretty heavy pretty quick. Claudy does a really good job of kind of delving into that. I think I recommend Claudy strongly to new Masons because they're not going to get too bogged down and overwhelmed, but he's going to open their eyes to some of the deeper meanings that aren't spoon-fed to you as you go through the process of joining.
Symbolism is a key in Masonry. Why do you believe symbols are portrayed in these degrees?
Well, because symbols are universal, in which universality is obviously one of the key tenets of Masonry. And again, just the fact that they're open to interpretation within the framework they're presented in.
It also can mean so much from one person looking at it at another. I always like to use this example, like if you go into the museum and you come through the west entrance, you might look at a painting and the lighting might hit and you might see a deeper meaning that conveys to you, where somebody comes from an eastern entrance and sees it on the other side.
Yeah.
It's just like a stop sign. When we look at a stop sign, we know it means stop. These symbols and these working tools that we have been accustomed to in these organizations really make us reflect and meditate. Why don't you talk about a little bit about reflection and meditation in Masonry, and what does it strive for us to do with meditation?
Okay. Yeah, and I think you hit on something there definitely with the symbolism. That's a huge part of what can make Masonry so personally impactful for the individual member. Is exactly that. You're not told exactly what to think and feel about everything that's presented to you. You're kind of left to put that together on your own. And yeah, that's where, a degree of circumspection comes into it. You can't, I don't think you're really experiencing Masonry until you take some time to really sit with yourself and examine what it all means to you. And that, again, can come in different forms to different people. But yeah, a lot of us definitely get something out of meditating on some of these themes and symbols that we learn through the craft. I know, here's another on the subject of good authors you can get a lot out of. Chuck Dunning has written quite a bit of actual guided kind of Masonic principles based meditations. That's something you could go seek out if you're interested, because I've definitely gained a lot from what Chuck has to offer there.
So, new people are coming into this fraternity. What do you think they're trying to seek into this? I mean, you're an educational officer.
Right.
You're here helping other lodge members get something that they may not get out of going to the library. With that, you always have new members coming in. What are you trying to focus on them? We have these tenets: faith, hope, and charity.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any of those or brotherly love, relief, and truth? Are there any of those tenets that you kind of like focus on to enlighten these new students into the craft?
Well, you certainly know. You know me and charity.
I don't think they do, though.
No, but they don't. So charity is a principal tenet of Masonry, and it's one that I get up on a soapbox pretty regularly about how that can be misunderstood because people hear charity and they have a preconceived notion of that meaning, making donations, charity. We've got our Shriners with their hospitals, and that's a big thing that's very recognizable to the public. But really, in Masonry, when we talk about charity, and we're going back to the Greek agape, which is translated as charity. It's one of the many Greek interpretations of the word love, though. And in our case, it's that brotherly love that we spread in Masonry. And that's, I think, a cornerstone of what it's really all about, is that, we form these bonds with these guys that, as we've said before, we've established we may have never even crossed paths with otherwise. And, I've got just an overwhelming number of guys that I know would bend over backwards to help me in any way they could. And that is that Masonic charity. It's that the forming of the bond. It's love is what it is. I mean, there's really no more to it. And people get weirded out maybe sometimes about that word, but that to me is what really boils down. And, the whole Masonic experience is not being afraid of recognizing the power of that, of really being able to connect with and bond with, and furthermore, like really be there for your brothers, for your fellow man. That's something that's largely lost in society as a whole, I think, these days.
Why is that?
Why is that? I don't know, because we're all distracted and selfish, and, it can be a challenge to take yourself out of that and kind of be selfless. And that's a big part of what Masonry tries to teach us, though, is that,
I think it's one thing and our society is really all about instant gratification, right? I need the new iPhone. I need this now, right?
Absolutely.
Masonry doesn't have that in the fraternity. You really got to work towards and seek it out and have these discussions.
Yeah, well, aside from those Grand Masters classes.
Stop. Stop. But no, seriously, talk about the work that goes into becoming a Mason. If somebody was going to look into Masonry, like, what would somebody need to do to really start off on the right foot?
Start off on the right foot. Well, I mean, looking to join the right foot is simply, knocking on the door.
Yes.
As we say. But I mean, once you've, been accepted and are a member and you're getting your footing in the fraternity, I mean, I think it's a matter of being able to put yourself out there, to be open to forming these relationships, because that doesn't come naturally to everyone.
Right.
But I think that the environment of a Masonic lodge makes that easier, even, like I said, for the people for whom it doesn't come naturally. I mean, I'm an introvert in a lot of ways, but not in a Masonic lodge.
Have you seen the transformation of these other men around you's journey into Freemasonry?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I see it in a lot of the guys that, I don't want to call anybody out.
No, you don't need to.
No, absolutely. I have seen that even just recently within the last year or so with some guys that have come into the lodge, where you see a real shift in their attitude. Or even we've got a member who I know for several years was convinced that, he didn't want anything to do with progressing as an officer and just kind of wanted to hang back and hang out. And now he's one of our most senior officers, one of our most promising officers. So, it definitely it gets into you and can change you for the better if you let it and put the work in to facilitate that.
Talk about traveling. Like I said, you're on what's your Masonic anniversary? You're at how many years now?
21 years
Wow.
In April of this year. Yeah.
21 years in the fraternity. You've clearly experienced different things that's happened in different lodges. Can you talk about a little bit about your travels in the fraternity? Anything that's really spoke to you? Anything that you've seen?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have seen a lot. Most of it's been fairly recently. Again, my early years, I didn't do a whole lot of traveling.
Why is that?
Um, for whatever reason, that wasn't something that was really um, part of the tradition of Wakeman Lodge. I don't know. When I was in my early years as a member there, that just wasn't something those guys were into. Like I said, it was a very tight-knit group. They kind of did their thing. Nobody was pushing me that direction. It's more been, since I came back that I've gotten very into the traveling aspect. And it is, I totally get it. So many people say it's, the greatest privilege we have as Masons is to be able to travel, because it can be so educational, so just fun to go and meet other groups of guys. There's that aspect of it. To get to see all these different Masonic buildings, some of which are just incredible.
Any in particular for some of the people watching?
Boy,
Have you been to Detroit Masonic Temple?
I still haven't. No, that's a sore point for me. We had a trip planned up there right before COVID that got canceled, and I haven't been able to make it happen since. No, there's been quite a few. What was the one just recently? That Defiance Temple.
Oh, yes. Omega.
Is really a cool lodge room. That was fun when we were there for Scottish Rite.
Egyptian theme, right?
Yes, yeah. Very Egyptian themed and cool architecture, and just one of the old buildings. In general, I like visiting the lodges that are still in their old original, or at least really early buildings, just because we're losing those. A lot of lodges have had to give up on them because they get too expensive to maintain and move into modern buildings. But there's something about the soul of those old Masonic buildings that have seen hundreds of years of brothers pass through there, and our rituals being enacted. Another one that stood out, and you were there with me, definitely was when we went down to Ben's installation.
Oh, Nevada Lodge.
Nevada Lodge, yes.
Yes.
That place, again, super old building, so nondescript from the outside.
The wood.
We get in there, and it was one of the most beautiful lodge rooms I've ever seen. You had just these polished hardwood floors with our working tools inlaid in the wood. They had those, their pillars, which I'm going to Masonically geek out a little bit here. The non-members won't get this at all, but those pillars were just so cool. They were hand painted, and they even, up in the other room, they had photos of the process of lodge members working on restoring those and reprinting them. And that kind of thing is just so cool when you see that, just the love that these brothers have for the whole thing, that the bond between the brothers, they share an ownership in this building and this whole world that goes with it. Yeah, that's the kind of cool stuff that comes out of traveling. You get to see little bits of how different lodges do little things slightly different than others. You go to different states or even countries, and you can see dramatic differences, but at the same time, it's always Masonry.
So I want you to talk a little bit about another thing that you really sparked my intrigue on, is consciousness.
Oh, okay.
All right. You've talked about consciousness and what it is to be conscious of your surroundings, of that divine spark. What does consciousness mean to you?
Well, to me, that is the big question, is what exactly is our consciousness? Because that's what makes us what we are, essentially. I mean, I'm not to get too woo-woo here, but I mean, I'm not this body. I'm not anything except for whatever the essence of me is. And that's my consciousness. That's that thing that we as humans have that no one else does.
It's like a kindred flame. Am I right?
Well, right. And yeah, and you reference that divine spark. That's a presentation I had given a while back. And I think that's a big part of certainly what's not overtly spelled out, but what we're really working on in Masonry is, boy, put me on the spot with this one, but so if we can all agree that we are of a divine nature, that's in us, and that's that divine spark. There is some bit of our creator within each of us, which is what makes us this human thing capable of even contemplating this idea. And we're working towards, I don't know, distilling our experience to the purest
to be better
form of that. Well, of course, yeah. Again, in simpler terms in Masonry, we talk about self-improvement. We use the symbol of the rough and perfect ashlar, which ashlar means stone.
Thank you for the non-Masons just checking it out.
You know, the symbolism of taking a crude stone out of a quarry and you know, chipping away at it until it's a perfect cube is an excellent analogy for trying to strive towards perfection in our own lives. In its simplest terms, I've extrapolated that out to a more spiritual seeking what could be called God consciousness, you know.
Let's talk about that as we are wrapping up this show. Spirituality in this. You have to believe in a higher power. It doesn't matter where you come from, correct? And it's not really talked about. We just all dwell together in unity in prayer. And just know that this higher power brought us together, provided us and ignited that divine spark within us to do better out into the world. Tell me, what has spirituality and Masonry meant to you?
It's meant a lot to me. Honestly, that's one of the things that I liked the most from the very start with Masonry is that it's a form of spirituality without any religious dogma attached to it at all. Like you said, to go back to I mentioned before, universality. It's meant to work for anyone, no matter what your concept of God is. Practicing Freemasonry will bring you closer to your God.
Now, why do you think that some religious institutions or some organizations fear Masonry?
Well, there's a lot of answers to that. I mean, it's a general distrust of the unknown. Ooh, they do things in secret. We don't know. It must be bad.
But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but when does a secret necessarily mean a bad thing, right?
No, it doesn't at all. And really, as you know, our secrets aren't really what they're cracked up to be anyways. It just the idea of being able to keep secrets. But I think the greater thing, I think that some of these religious institutions see it as a threat, and probably more than anything, a financial threat.
Oh, so maybe thinking out of their God box that they have in their certain institutions.
Yeah, I think, quite frankly, a lot of the churches that try to prohibit their members from being Masons, it's taking time away from serving the church and taking money out of the church coffers to an extent if you're paying Masonic dues. Again, I don't want to create...
No, of course not. We're not...
I don't want to be Mr. Anti-Church here, but I think that's a real thing. And I mean, I have looked into that a bit, and I've been attacked by Baptists about the fact that I belong to a cult and we practice evil practices.
But they don't know. They're the outsiders looking in, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So as we round this out, what would you say to somebody who is looking into this fraternity?
Well, I'd say it's awesome that you're looking into it. If you're really just somebody who's heard a little bit about it and you're curious, there's a lot of avenues you can take. We've got here in Ohio, the Grand Lodge website. You can go in there and fill out a little interest form, and they'll have somebody reach out to you and help hook you up with a lodge. If you know of the lodge in your town, it's pretty easy to find contact information. A lot of lodges are on Facebook these days. A lot of them have web pages. Again, Grand Lodge of Ohio website, and be able to help you find contact information, reach out. A lot of lodges like ours, we have social functions specifically for the purpose of getting to know guys that might be interested in joining and giving them a chance to get to know us before they take that next step of actually applying for membership. So I say if it's something that even slightly intrigues you or you're curious about, reach out to a lodge, meet some guys. You'll know pretty quick whether it's for you or not.
That is Brother Jerel Fish, a Mason, a one-day Mason whose investment in the fraternity towards education, bettering himself, and helping others better themselves is paying off dividends in Ohio and Masonry in general. That's Jerel Fish. I'm Rob Franks, and you are all square. Hey, RL Franks here. Thanks again for watching today's episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Also, if you believe someone can benefit from the message that we provided on today's podcast, send it over to them. You may inspire them.